Okay, the chapters last week were 3rd Nephi 20 to 26, and I don't want to spend very much time on them. There's so much in there. It's one of my favorite readings so far this year. But there's just a couple of things I want to talk about and just take a few minutes here. So let's pull up the scriptures here, and we'll start in chapter 20. And in verse 11, he starts off by saying, "Ye remember that I spake unto you and said that when the words of Isaiah should be fulfilled, behold, they are written, and ye have them before you, therefore search them." Jesus Christ is speaking to these people around the temple in Bountiful. Now, the time frame here is a little confusing in the Book of Mormon. You get the impression when you read it through the first time that there was this great, massive destruction, and then the voice was in heaven, and then the Savior appeared and was with them for 3 or 4 days. But if you go through it verse by verse, you realize that this probably happened over a long period of time, maybe over a year time, various visits. And on this particular visit, the people had had time to come from wherever they were, the righteous people, to come from wherever they were dispersed across the land. And they gathered at the temple in Bountiful. It's a natural place where you go if there was a big destruction. And now they're in Bountiful. And the Lord starts teaching them and quoting to them from the words of Isaiah. And you have to wonder, why would Jesus Christ, a perfect God now, with all of his glory and power, why wouldn't he just speak his own words? Why would he quote from Isaiah and talk about them all being fulfilled? And much of what he says is in Isaiah in these next few chapters. And it leads us to believe that he wants us to understand that in the mouth of his servants, it's as if he were to say it himself. And so he's giving us the significance of listening to prophets by talking about Isaiah. So he reminds them about Isaiah. And then in verse 13, he's talking about the restoration of the last days. And he says, "And then shall the remnants which are shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth." Think about the use of the word remnant. When you think of remnant, you're not thinking of the whole garment. It's just the little piece that was broken off. And so he's reminding the people that those who will be faithful and will be gathered in the last day will be a small number, one of a city, two of a village, or however he put it when he was alive. And so he's talking about a very small group of people relative to the size of the earth. And that's important because he goes on to say what this small group of people is going to do. And so it's important to remember that they're small. So in verse 16, "Then shall ye, who are a remnant of the house of Jacob," so not just a remnant of the world, but a remnant of a small part of the world, "go forth among them, and ye shall be in the midst of them, the Gentiles, who shall be many, and ye shall be among them as a lion among the beasts of the forest, and as a young lion among the flocks of sheep." Now, I want you to imagine the imagery that he's creating here. I went to Africa on a safari, and while I was there, I noticed, as anyone would that went there, that the king of the forest is the lion. And when the lion, who has his own territory, and he's the only male dominant lion in that territory, when he walks with his pride through the territory, everything flees before him. Even the birds, which are not at risk from a lion, flee before him, which is interesting if you think about it. And he says, "A lion among the flocks of sheep." Imagine for a moment that you've got a flock of 2,000 sheep. 2,000. Could they not easily trample a young lion in such vast numbers? And yet, if a young lion were to appear among a flock of 2,000 sheep, what would they do? They would immediately scatter in all directions and panic, because all they know is that the lion is the king of the forest and he's dangerous and they need to flee. So when he says that his small remnant of people will go forth among the Gentiles like a young lion among sheep, recognize that in our day, in the last day, I think Elder Irene said that even those who do not believe the church will recognize that God is with us. He's saying that in our day, the world will flee before the covenant people of Israel. And that's quite a powerful thing. So verse 17, "Thy hand shall be lifted upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. For I will make my people with whom the Father hath covenanted. Yea, I will make thy horn iron, and I will make thy hoofs brass." Now remember, Isaiah speaks in the time of Lehi, actually, a few years before Lehi. And so that's 2,500 years ago. In those days, an animal with horns, what was the horn for? The horn of the animal was the point at which they attacked their enemy. That was the strong point. And the hoofs gave them the strength and allowed them to move. So he says, I'll make thy horns iron. Of course, in their day, something made of iron was as tough as something could be, meaning, I will make you, my small remnant, like a lion with a strong horn of iron to go forth and bust the world into pieces. Verse 22, and behold, this people will I establish in this land. Now he's standing in the land of America, under the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob. And it shall be a new Jerusalem, and the powers of heaven shall be in the midst of this people, yea, even I will be in the midst of you. I love that last line, because as you read through these chapters, you realize that not all of this happens after the second coming. A lot of it happens before the second coming. And yet he says, I will be with you, I will be in your midst. That's a pretty big promise, especially in our day dealing with the virus and such. Now let's jump over to chapter 21, verse 4, and read more about this land that we live in. It says, for it is wisdom in the Father that they, the remnant of the house of Israel, shall be established in this land and be set up as a free people by the power of the Father, that these things might come forth from them unto a remnant of your seed, that the covenant of the Father may be fulfilled, which he hath covenanted with his people, O house of Israel. So what he just said to these people is, first of all, he's going to set the land up as a free land. And we know that that's setting up a constitutional government with the founding fathers back in the 18th century. And if you think about it, he says in this verse, I will set them up as a free people, that the covenant of the Father might be fulfilled. In other words, if this country is not a free land, if it is not established as a free land, then the covenant of the Father cannot be fulfilled. And we know that the Father fulfills all of his covenants. And so this, to me, is a promise that not only did the Lord set up this land as a free land, but he will maintain it as a free land. Because if he doesn't, then the Father can no longer fulfill the covenant that he's made. Verse 8, and when that day shall come, it shall come to pass that kings shall shut their mouths, for that which they had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. Now think about kings. In another place, this verse includes also other leaders. Think about the leaders of the earth in which we live. They sit around and they make plans for the future. Okay, if I'm elected, I'm going to do this, and my party's going to do this, or we're going to move into Hong Kong or into Taiwan. We're going to take them over, or the Russians might want to move into Ukraine or whatever. And the kings of the world make all these plans for how they're going to obtain and maintain their power. But here he says, the king's mouths shall be shut, and that which they had not been told shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. And what is it that they have not heard? The one thing that the kings have not considered in all of their planning is the possibility and the reality that in the last day, their power will be taken away, their mouths will be shut, and their world will be ruled by the humble remnants of Jacob, led by Jesus Christ. That's what they have not considered. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and there's other places in here where it talks about those same concepts in different details, such as in verses 12 through 15. And 15 and 12 through 14 is a lot about what I just talked about. But in 15 it says, and I will cut off the cities of thy land and throw down all thy strongholds. I would venture to guess in this particular part that if we look at what's going on in the world today, to some degree, he allows those cities to be thrown down by the people who inhabit them. The wicked people of the world are actually the ones who are destroying their own cities right now. And so that's kind of interesting that he says he's going to throw down their cities and their strongholds. Now let's just go to chapter 24 just to finish up today. Just want to have a couple thoughts that I thought were important for you. Go down to verse 14. And it said, when I was when I was younger, in high school, the church has grown over the years from the days of Joseph Smith to today. And the Lord, as our president prophet has told us, is restoring his gospel even still. But when I was in high school, it was church policy and spoken of in conference not to play face cards. And I remember I was a nerd in high school and I had my friends, and every lunch we played hearts or we played spades, and we loved playing cards. And I was reading a conference talk and it says members of the church should not play face cards. And I thought, oh brother, okay. So I made the personal commitment to not play face cards anymore. It was very, very difficult. The last 2 years of my high school, junior and senior, I sat there with my friends and I'd watch them play cards, and I couldn't join in. And I wanted to, and a lot of times they would tell me to, and I just don't feel good about it, and so I didn't. And then the years went by, and I got older, and now they don't talk about face cards anymore. And you can play face cards all you want now. And I look back on my youth and I thought, boy, what a waste of my 2 years of time trying to follow a covenant or a commandment. There was a commandment at the time, but I looked back and felt like my time had been wasted. Well, I came upon this verse here in 3 Nephi 24, and it says, "Ye have said, it is vain to serve God, and what doth it profit that we have kept his ordinances, and that we have walked mournfully before the Lord of hosts?" And yeah, I did walk mournfully some of those days when I was so sad I couldn't play cards with my friends. But then verse 16, "Then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name. And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels." And I thought, that phrase, some say it's vain to serve God. It was vain that I did that when I was young. And he says, no, a book of remembrance is written before him, for the Lord, of those who feared him. And I realized that God records our acts. And when we obey, when we do what's right, when we do anything that's good in this life, he writes it down and he remembers it. And when I saw that, I realized that my obedience in those years, even though it's no longer necessary, was just as valuable as it could have possibly been. Now, there's later verses further on in 3 Nephi and 4 Nephi where this concept is repeated, where it says, where the Savior actually tells the people, write down everything that I say to you. And then he says, God writes everything down in heaven. And so I just want you to think about that as we go through the trials of these last days, that every good deed that you do is recorded and remembered. And one day the Lord will remember those things to you and say, these are the people who loved me and served me. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. We'll try to do this every week, and hopefully we can have a fun time with it.